Right, guys, welcome back to Zupi, the Autotelic Mindset. Here with Mr. Adrian Sorichetti, professional lacrosse player. Like always, with these athletes and their busy schedules, it's sometimes hard to get them in town, but lucky enough, he's had has a little bit of time here to join us. So I just want to thank you, Adrian, for joining us here.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the mindset and things I can do to help me as a player and as a person.
So just give us your introduction, who you are, what got you into the sport here, and take it away.
Thanks. So my name is Adrian Sorichetti. I grew up in Whitby, Ontario. I've been playing hockey and lacrosse for a very long time. I started lacrosse when I was 3 years old, and I think I started skating maybe around that time too, but I didn't start playing until I was 6. So I'm 28 now. I currently play for the San Diego Seals in the National Lacrosse League. I've been playing pro lacrosse for about 6 years now. I grew up in Whitby, like I said, playing for Whitby Warriors. I grew up, playing rep lacrosse all the way through, and hockey, and I kind of hit a fork in the road, maybe around 15 or 16 years old, where I had to make that decision to focus on one sport, and I was super passionate about lacrosse, so I headed in that direction. So after minor lacrosse, I played junior in Whitby. I won a Minto Cup in 2011. I competed at Hofstra University playing Division I lacrosse. And then after NCAA, I was drafted 13th overall to the Edmonton Rush. I played 5 years with the Rush organization, and most recently the NLL has expanded to a few more teams, so I was picked up in the expansion draft to San Diego. So pretty much that's where I'm at right now, and hockey and lacrosse were a big part of my life, and here in Whitby, and I've traveled to a lot of places just playing sports and using that as a vehicle to get an education.
Yeah, it's you have quite the the resume there, and I think growing up in Whitby myself, I think we're so fortunate to have the facilities we have, like Iroquois Park, and being able to progress through the system. But I just want to backtrack you here, because I know growing up, when you get involved with sports, you start to meet new families and gain new friends. But I know you come from a family of, is it 4?
3. I have 2 siblings, but my extended, like my family, it's pretty large, yeah.
So you had your brother Eric.
Yep.
He's older brother.
Older, and my sister Moni. They both competed in rep sports all the way through, and I have a bunch of uncles and cousins, and my dad and his brothers. They all played sports here in Whitby.
So sports kind of was something that kind of ran through your blood at an early age.
Yeah,
it seems like.
Yeah, it was. I think it's a big part of a lot of people's lives, and whether it is sports or music or art or whatever it is, I think just having a passion and having goals for something, and having an agenda, and meeting certain goals along the way, and setting new goals for yourself and having those accomplishments. I think that's a big part of life.
And it's funny, it's funny you talk about goals and setting them and trying to attain them, because right now I find there's so much pressure to go to university, and get a job, and it's so, especially as millennials, it's so tough. But I think through sports, we all want to play professional one day, but at the end of the day, it's about it's as a kid growing up and just learning teamwork, respect, how to collaborate with others, and I think that is sometimes more powerful than the education you get in the school, which I think I myself as an athlete has really helped me progress in my future, just coming from a sports background, let alone all the knowledge through school.
I agree completely. I think there's a lot of life lessons you can learn through sports, whether it's an individual sport or team sport, but essentially you're you're a part of something, and you learn how to win, you learn how to lose, you learn how to set goals for yourself and to work towards those goals. And that's a lot of life lessons are taught and learned in sports for sure.
So I just want to I want to make sure I get this the timeline right. So correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm jumping too far ahead
Sure.
with some of the stuff. But so you grew up within the Whippy minor programs with lacrosse, and you said you're a big hockey player as well. At what age did you realize, okay, whether it was hockey, lacrosse, that you realized, okay, I could potentially do this full time?
I think from a young age, I was just hooked on lacrosse, like right off the hop. I think I was very attached to it, and not to take anything away from hockey, I did enjoy my hockey career and the players that I played with along the way. And most of those players did transition over from winter to summer, and I played with a lot of them and against them. But I think it really hit me around 14, maybe even 13, because I remember receiving my first Inside Lacrosse magazine, and I was browsing through it, and I saw, all these teams that were universities, and I was very intrigued by it, and I started doing more research, and I then later learned that a lot of these athletes were student athletes, and that was a very pivotal moment in my academic and athletic career, because I wanted that, and I was working towards accomplishing that at a young age. So I then was recruited and did a lot of research and reached out to a lot of private schools in New York, in the tri-state area, because most of those schools specialize in student athletes. And unfortunately at the time, I wasn't receiving the best grades, just because the work-life balance was very demanding, and I didn't really have the tools to succeed at that time in my life. So I had to make some big life choices, and I moved away when I was 14 or 15 years old to New York, and I competed there in hockey, lacrosse, and I played a little bit of football. But more importantly, I was in an environment that was focused heavily on student athletes, and like I said, going back, I was more focused, as all teenagers are, or preteens, on sports and friends. So I didn't have that academic focus as I needed. So I needed to put myself in an environment to really push me towards the importance of academics, and the only way I was to receive a scholarship to a Division I school was to make sure that I was a complete student athlete.
Awesome. I love, on the autotelic mindset, we always bring up my balance board. So we'll slowly get into some of that with some of the stuff you're talking about here with, balancing sports, friendships, relationships, career, education, and finding that balance. But I find the trend right now with these athletes is, growing up, they're multi-sport athletes, whether it's hockey, lacrosse, soccer, whatever it may be. And I mean, kudos to those who can, do two sports at a time, but it seems like eventually, like, you have to pick one over the other. How it seems like you were really going the lacrosse route, but at the end of the day, you still have to make that decision. What were kind of the deciding factors for you to say, okay, lacrosse is my sport, I'm going to focus on that one?
Yeah, and I did compete at a pretty high level in hockey, and I think it was passion that really steered me in the lacrosse direction. And I think the opportunities that were ahead of me were much greater in lacrosse than hockey. And I think, when you get to a competitive level or a super competitive level, your time is limited, whether it's the training that you have to do, or the film that you have to watch, or the practicing that you have to be involved in. There's a limited amount of time that's really, sorted out, that you need to put yourself into, and I think the amount of work that is necessary to be a high level athlete, it is a lot of focused time. So you really have to focus in on things that are controllable. And I was reaching a point in, my 15, 16 year age mark where if I was to put all my effort into 3 things or 4 things, it was just too much for me to handle. So I really had to pick something that I could control. And I think focusing on lacrosse and school and having a life on the side, those were 3 items that I feel like I was most passionate about, and I could control a lot of the items that were included in them. Because it's easy to say I want to play hockey, lacrosse, basketball, I want to play with my friends, and I want to go adventure around and do other things that you want to do. But unfortunately there's a thing called time and a thing called
improving, getting
right?
better
Exactly.
in that area.
Yeah, so like I've never had to really break that down to somebody, but it's interesting talking to you now, flashing back how many years, and to think that where was my mind at that point, and what were the decisions that I had to make, and what was the outcome, and the outcome is the present moment now, and I'm continuing to build that on my career. But going back to what I'm really trying to say is I didn't have enough time and energy to really break up into all those areas. So I really had to choose those 3 items, and I again was super passionate about lacrosse. I really obviously needed to focus on school, and an important piece to me is family and friends. So those were 3 items that I knew I could have most control, most passion, and hopefully most the most success out of those 3 items.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about and to recognize at such, I'd say, an early age, you have to dial into these certain areas, because if you don't have guidance, you can easily get lost in the shuffle. And like you said, you just made the decision to go out to the States to improve your lacrosse as well as your education, where, sometimes kids just don't have the mentor or aren't given the right advice to do that. So it's cool to see you kind of figure that out at such an early age. But I remember having a conversation with you. We were sitting down once and we were talking about, you have these different categories, like you're talking about your social life, your sports, your relationships, and, it can become overwhelming. And I remember you saying you had to group the 2, and I think it was with your social life and your sports. Mm-hmm. You obviously going to school, you have, your school, let's say you call them your school friends, and you're going out with them, and then you have your sports friends. And I think at one point you said, this is just too much. I have to somehow group them together in order to maintain that balance,
right?
So I can focus on my sports as well as education and relationships.
So those 3 items that I said that I needed to focus on, obviously sports were important, family and friends were important, and school. So to your point and to what we discussed, the social life and the sports, 3 items, are a lot at times, but I had the ability. I mean, everybody has the ability, but I combined the 2. So I combined the social aspect of my sports together. So ultimately it was 2 items that I was putting a lot of my attention into.
Good. So before we kind of move forward, I want to just briefly, I want you kind of explain for the younger athletes out there that, who want to have a career or make a career out of lacrosse, the process of transitioning from minor to looking to get scholarships and what that process kind of looks like, just to give, a listener or a viewer who's maybe listening and wants to know more information, and like I said, just having someone to guide them or give them some advice. So
Sure.
The transition from minor, looking for a scholarship, getting your foot in the door.
Definitely. There are a lot of factors, and I think the first one I can touch on is how competitive sports are becoming at the minor level, and transitioning into that NCAA or professional level. And I think lacrosse is at a unique point in time right now where it does not have a ton of traction, or it does not have a ton of attention, but it does have a ton of traction, where it is the fastest growing sport in North America, and a lot of players, especially in the United States, are transitioning into lacrosse because it has the physicality of football, and it has the technicalities and the strategy behind basketball, and it's just a quick sport, so people are starting to catch on to it a little bit down in the States. But having said that, a lot of NCAA programs are constantly trying to recruit high-level players, and 5-10 years ago, a lot of players that were being recruited to these high-end schools were it was pretty competitive, but a lot of these top 10, top 20 Division I teams were getting the kids that were already drawn to their programs because of the name, like Syracuse or North Carolina or Duke. Like, all the kids that were playing minor really wanted to go to those higher end schools. And fast forward 5-10 years, not all those kids can make those rosters. So what I'm trying to say is Duke only has 40 roster spots on their team, and they cannot recruit the influx of athletes that are coming from these minor programs. So it's becoming more and more competitive at the Division I level, not only for players but coaches to recruit. So what coaches are now looking for is the complete package. Every kid that they're looking at now is pretty skilled and athletic. So what separates a bucket of 1,000 kids that are all highly skilled midfielders, or 1,000 highly skilled and athletic attackers, and that factor is your academics. So if I'm looking at a group of 20 players and they're all super good at lacrosse, how can I separate them? And that is becoming the grades. What are the kids not only accomplishing on the field, but what are they accomplishing in the classroom? So my advice for athletes is, as much effort and time and practice you're putting into your training in your sport, try to translate that into your academics and your work, because that is going to be a deciding factor when you're communicating with these Division I programs, Division II or Division III. And that is something that I had to learn the hard way. And, fortunately, I made decisions to put myself in an environment where I was most focused and had the best opportunity to be successful. But not everybody can do that, and what you can do and what you can control is how much time and effort you can put into your schooling.
Yeah, so that's some good advice for you young folks who are trying to make your way through the realm of becoming a professional. So transitioning from minor into your college years. So for lacrosse, you have box lacrosse, which is here in Canada is obviously pretty big, and I think that's where
it's our summer national sport.
So we kind of tend to put most of our time and energy into the box system, but getting a scholarship and playing college lacrosse, you transition to the field game, right?
Right.
So I want you to talk about your experience, making the transition from minors up into moving into college. And I know you had some with some of your coaches. They saw some unique talents and abilities of yours, and you made some transitions with your own game and positions you were playing. So talk a little bit about your experience in college academically, some of the relationships you built through playing with, it was Hofstede, right?
Hofstra, yeah.
Hofstra. And yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Growing up in Canada, obviously, it's predominantly box lacrosse. And in my opinion and experiences, and a lot of college coaches are now praising the box game simply because you are in a sport and an environment that is constantly allowing players to improve their fundamental skill. Now, if you can catch, pass, shoot, cradle, and scoop a ball, you can play lacrosse. And in the field game, it's played on a football field, essentially, or a soccer field. It's a lot bigger spaces, and the positions are, I would say, more like chess. You have designated positions, and you can only do so much as a defensive player or a midi or an attackman. Now, box lacrosse, it's pretty much, like hockey. You have free flow of the floor, it's 5-on-5, and every player is playing offense, defense, and, learning the skills at a much quicker rate. And that's easily broken down by, if we were having a catch on a football field and you missed a ball, the ball would probably roll 15 or 20 yards past you, and you'd have to run and try to scoop it up and reset the passing game. Now, if you missed a ball in box lacrosse, that ball would miss your stick, hit the boards, and bounce back. So it's creating an environment where kids are subjected to constant repetition, opposed to a slow restart, and hopefully the kid or player will catch the ball. So I think that's the best way to describe it. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because a lot of box lacrosse players learn their fundamental skill at a quicker rate, and that skill and creativity that's learned inside the box rink can translate well into the field game. It's just amazing to see a box player transition into the field game, and the skill is the same, and the only thing that's different is positioning and rules. So if you know the fundamental skills of the game, and you're going into an environment where you just have to know the rules and some position changes, it's a lot easier than a field player who understands the field rules and the field positions, and now he or she is forced to play box lacrosse where it's purely fundamental skill. That athlete is going to be a lot further behind than a box athlete. Hopefully that makes sense. But
so the transition was fairly easy for
very,
you.
Very, very easy, and I can attest to that by providing a lot of high-end or statistical breakthroughs in the NCAA or Canadian box lacrosse players.
Yeah, and it's a good, through college you're playing field, but then transitioning to professional, you're back in the box, right?
Right, yeah. So I guess to your question, I learned all my fundamental skill through box lacrosse, and I learned how to play offense, defense, and then in field lacrosse, the defensive players typically have long poles, so 6-foot poles with a head on the end of it, and nobody really wanted to play that growing up, so I decided to play defense, where I learned a lot of the defensive skills in field, and I was recruited as a long stick midfielder, and then I changed positions a few practices in, and I played offense. So I was more of a utility guy. And the way I coach and the way I teach is, you're a lacrosse player, so coaching the field game, you'll have kids come in and it's like, okay, I'm a defenseman or a long pole or I'm an attackman, and the way that the box game forces you to become is a lacrosse player. You're learning every aspect of the game, so you're more I don't know if this is a word, but you're more recruitable.
Yeah.
Coaches would look at you more than the next person because you can offer more to that team.
Kind of like you were saying earlier about being the complete package.
Right.
I think that's kind of adds to that, not necessarily specializing in one specific thing, but trying to be well-rounded.
Exactly. Yes. And going to the pro game, there's a professional indoor league and a professional outdoor league, and again, it's going back to finding ways to separate yourself for teams to recruit or draft you. And that's my best advice for young athletes getting into the game is don't just, learn how to play defense. Learn how to catch, pass, shoot, cradle, become a fully developed lacrosse player. and a well-rounded student athlete for that matter.
And as we move into your professional lacrosse career here, it doesn't matter what sport it is now with technology and just the education we have in the sporting world, like the competition, the players are getting so much better and it's just making it so much harder. So the advice Adrian's sharing, I think, is very crucial to pay attention to, because to get to the next level, like hard work, that's what it takes. And hard work is something very easily to say, but to really put it into action each and every day can, separate you from the next guy. So getting these little tidbits of information and working on them is will help you, progress in your future, whether it doesn't matter what sport it is, but just goes to show you how competitive it is out there to make these teams, leagues, and different divisions. So went through your college years and obviously looking into the draft, I'm sure you kind of had some sort of feel like you were going to get picked up. I'm not really as familiar with the NLL draft, but I'm sure you had some sort of instinct that someone was going to pick you up. So going into that day, or how you can even explain slightly how it worked, the feelings and where things were heading with regards to being drafted to the NLL.
Yeah, the draft is pretty similar to the hockey draft, NFL draft. It's a special day for a lot of the players that are coming into it, and I knew that it was my draft year simply because my NCAA career was over, and a lot of the athletes that were in the draft did compete in the NCAA, and in order to play professional lacrosse or football or anything, you cannot be a part of the NCAA. So you'll see a lot of NCAA graduates become, eligible for the draft. And, I knew that I was going to be drafted. I just didn't know when. I was in contact with a lot of teams just regarding my commitment and, where my head was at in terms of lacrosse and the next steps in my career. And I think that's pretty common in every other draft as well. A lot of teams have those meetings with players just to kind of meet them and see if they are, a good fit for their current roster. And, and I think to go back to what I was mentioning about the separating factors, you get to a point in your career where your skill is definitely one component to a team, but also it's the person you are off the floor. A lot of teams are realizing that bringing good people in the dressing room is more important than bringing, the most skilled person in the dressing room. So I think, learning that along the way, just being a good person and being a good teammate and translating everything that you work for on the floor, it should just be, as equal off the floor. And going back to the draft, it was obviously a special day. I had a lot of family in attendance, and there were rumblings that certain guys were going first, second, third, fourth, fifth overall, and there were a couple trades made, before my selection, and I got drafted to a team that I was very familiar with. The coach and GM was a coach in Whitby, and he coached me in junior, and there were a lot of Durham region athletes on the roster. So not only was I excited, I was very comfortable with the players that were on the team. So it made the adjustment and the transition into the pro league a lot smoother. And again, I was just very grateful for the opportunity. And once that day was over, it was back to work, because like all professional roster spots, it's a job, right? You're working for a position on that team.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's funny, this will lead into, like Adrian said, it was the Edmonton Rush, which then got moved over to Saskatchewan Rush.
Yep, the owner moved it to Saskatchewan just simply because for business purposes.
So this is cool because he was part of 3 championships, three in a row.
One in 2015, 2016, and then 2018.
Okay. So this is, what he was saying before with regards to being a team player and stuff. I really want you to elaborate more on that, because teams can look good on paper, but doesn't make them a championship team.
Right.
On paper is one thing, but coming together as a team and individuals to win a championship, I think is something very unique and very special. And so I want you to talk about team sports. Very unique because you have, your own individual goals and what you want to attain, but they also have to align with the team atmosphere and building that camaraderie, coming together at the right place, the right time to win these championships. And we were actually talking about earlier a little bit about flow, and community flow or group flow is actually very powerful. And I think with a team sport, if you can gel at the right time and create that flow, is something very powerful. So talk about, because as growing up through the minor system, little kids, like you said, they want to be the best, they want to be the scorer, they want to be the the superstar guy. But when you get to these higher levels, it's more about your character. What role do you play within the team, and that's going to help the team win. So is that the shutdown defender who blocks the shot so the offense can take it and go down and score? Talk about the pieces of the puzzle that made up your championship team.
Sure. Yeah, you nailed it right on the head. As a minor athlete, that's a breeding ground for the person and the player that you become. And everybody obviously wants to be the scorer and the best player. So taking that thought and then progressing it to the next level, which is the junior level. And you have a pool full of players that are all assigned essentially a role, but it's more it's more focused on becoming the best, because there is another layer to the puzzle, and that another layer is the professional level. Now you're creating a team of, let's just say, for argument's sake, you have 10 offensive players and 10 defensive players. Now those 10 offensive players and defensive players all came from a minor program, and they were passionate and committed, and obviously they were good enough to play junior somewhere. So those players are probably the top in their junior teams, and now you're taking that and putting them on a professional team. So these guys are the best of the best. Along the way, they've worked, they've trained, they've studied, and they've become a professional player. Now, having all of those pro players, they're all highly skilled, highly trained, super, super good players. And now, as a coach, you have to assign roles. So this is the interesting part of a pro team, because you can say, hey, we understand you're a great player. You've scored, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of goals along your career. But now we see you as a player that can really open up opportunities for other players to get open because of your size and your speed. So depending on the person you are, you're now taking instruction from a team or a coach, and now you have to, make a decision. Are you going to buy into that role, or are you going to, want to be the player that you were always the go-to player? So you want to, be the go-to player. So you're getting to a point, and it's kind of, new to me to describe this with you, and this is kind of part of the reason why I think it's interesting opening up these elements to the game. But depending on the person you are, you're either gonna say, yes, I'm gonna commit to this and I'm gonna be that type of player, or no, I want to have the ball on my stick and I want to do all the work and go to the net and score and get all the glory. So that's the biggest, I think, challenge for teams to overcome, is having all these high scoring, highly potent offensive and players on their team, but you can't have every guy being the best outside shooter, because you need someone going through the middle and someone doing all the grind work to get those guys open and get the balls in the corner and everything else that helps a successful offense work. So and that's going with just being a good teammate, being a good person. And I've been involved with teams that buy into the culture and the identity of a team, and it's definitely something a lot of people and a lot of individuals struggle with. But if it's for the greater good of the team and to win and to compete, then most of those players who do buy in are very successful in the league. And then unfortunately, the players that do not buy into that system, they slowly fade out of the league, because at the end of the day, you need to have good people and good teammates and just overall buy-in from every individual on a team, and that's what makes a team successful.
So I like what you're saying here, because I try to relate this. Yes, we're talking about a sport, but talking about life in general, business. If you're an entrepreneur, creating a business, you're part of a business, being part of that culture, that identity, and finding out what you want to be a part of, so you can find that place where you can flourish the most and become successful, along with creating that culture and environment you want to create for your business to be successful. And same for relationships, surrounding yourself with people that have same interest, that make you a better person, is very important. So kind of taking Adrian's some of his teachings that he learned through his team sport, taking that outside of the arena into life is very important as well, and I think something we can all kind of relate to as well. So like I said, winning never gets old. 3 championships, and I'm sure each and every one of them was special in its own unique way. And as an individual, I think it's kind of kudos to you and the role you play within your team. I saw this past year you came back. Obviously, you got traded this past year, and you came back to Saskatchewan. They had a little bit of some video clips of you and your players, and I think the one social media one was like, what kind of guy was Adrian Sorichetti as a player, and it was funny to listen to and watch. Your old teammates say such good things about you, and you definitely seems like you play a very important role on the type of player, as well as your character, like you said, off the field. So, what did that mean to you as your players, recognizing you for the qualities that you possess, and just talk about, what was that character, and, what did you bring to the team?
Yeah, I think priority number one with any team that I've been a part of is to try to enjoy myself. And I think naturally, I'm excited to play the game, and I'm excited to learn. And going back to what we were talking about, and combining that social aspect into my sport, I really took that to heart, because that was my time of day or time of the week to really have my social time, off the floor, like, in the locker room or after or whatever. But it was just a great place for me to, let free of the stress of school or whatever it may be, just to have fun. And I think naturally the sport provided a lot of fun for me. And, when people are having fun, they tend to be in a good spirit. So I'm very fortunate to play with the players that I've played with along my career, and I owe a lot of credit to them for helping that lacrosse experience become some of the best experiences of my life. And the players I've met along the way are some of my best friends, and I think that's through the competition and the battles that you go through, and just the experiences that you overcome, the obstacles you overcome. And like I said, I'm very fortunate to play with the people that I did. And overall, it doesn't hurt to be a good person. Like on the floor, you can always, be the best that you can be, but challenge yourself to be the same off the floor. And it's a legacy, right? What you want to leave, what you want people to say when you're not there.
So we'll post this, but for Adrian's social media, it's Adrian Sorichetti 72. If you follow him, you get to see him on the court, but you also get to see some of the stuff like he's talking about that he does off the court. I follow him, and he's very entertaining and some of the stuff he does. So I encourage you to give him a follow, as you'll be entertained if you're into lacrosse, as well as he has a good sense of humor and always gives me a good laugh when I come across one of his posts. So be sure to give him a follow, and like I said, I'll post that when we post the podcast here. So I want to move into kind of the, obviously your professional career can only last so long, and I know with the NLL growing, you guys aren't professional contracts, but I know there's a lot of players that do stuff outside of the arena. And I know from just talking to you and kind of growing up with you, you have the entrepreneurial spirit kind of inside you, along with, like you said, your personality and the off court stuff. So what kind of ambition, I know you're always onto something with regards to, finding a new thing or business related or whatever it may be. What's kind of in store, or what do you kind of see developing over the years to come, and maybe your career outside of lacrosse?
Yeah, I think lacrosse is at a very interesting part in time right now, in the at the professional level. It's growing tremendously at the grassroots level, and I know the NLL is expanding into more cities, and that's creating more jobs, not only as a player, but from management roles and media roles and all the other kind of job opportunities that come with any expansion or growth in a company. So, my heart lies in lacrosse, and outside the rink, I really try to improve the game, whether it's from a curriculum standpoint or, a grassroots, introductory standpoint. So I do a lot of work in the San Diego community, and when I was in Saskatchewan, I did a lot of work for their minor programs and national teams. And I just see a lot of growth at the youth and grassroots level, and the unfortunate side to that is there is not enough quality coaching to meet the demand of registrants in the sport. So a passion of mine is to work with these local communities and to really help their coaches teach the game and create an experience, a positive experience, pretty much the same as I had in the sport. And I think that's it's an easy thing to do. It's pretty easy for some of these athletes to fall in love with sports, especially if they have good people above them who are giving positive experiences for them.
So I think as a professional athlete, like anyone, you always want to give back and pass on your knowledge, however that may come. I think is, to most professional athletes, that's just second nature to do so. So keep an eye out for Adrian Sorichetti. They're still in mid-season. Like I said, give them a follow, and to get a little bit of insights on lacrosse and where you started, where you are now, and where you're going, along with got a lot of lacrosse education in general, and how the league is expanding, and it seems like there's just